Well, hey everybody, Happy New Year, and hope 2017 is off to a good start for everybody. Mine was off to a rough start because of how I chose to spend New Year's Eve, and I will leave that at that. So, basically, this is my video talking about how to approach change in the coming year because as always, we're coming back again and again and again to areas that could benefit from some more clarity. And this whole idea of New Year's resolutions, goals for the new year, is one of these major areas where people start out with great intentions and some may get farther than others. But generally speaking, the idea of a New Year's resolution has become a tired cliche. Well, why is that? Is it because everybody ends up making all the changes they want and they stick to their resolutions, and from one year to the next, they're just ever increasingly fabulous and fantastic and high functioning, high caliber people? No, right? So gyms are notoriously very busy and crowded in the first few months of the year, and they're also just as notoriously sparse and thinning out when you get even just a few months in. Even by April, May, June, you're already talking about a huge decrease in who's there. And it always sort of ends up going back to the really committed people. So and then there's also things like, if you're ever at the checkout aisle, you notice tons and tons and tons of magazines about things like weight loss or getting this or that area of your life together. These are all the kinds of things that people use a New Year's resolution to focus on, but it's a constant area of discussion. So chances are we're not totally sure on how to go about this the right way because the results speak for themselves. I mean, the results just convey the validity of the method, right? So I have 6 things that are a mixture of quantitative and qualitative things that are going to set you up for success if there is something new you're looking for this year. I think most people, whether they are on this New Year's resolution bandwagon or not, can just think of some things that they would like to see take a change for the better, or things that they want to sort of vanish from their lives, or things they want to just basically start doing that they're not doing. It could be anything. It could be saving money. It could be exercise. It could be losing weight. It could be going back to school. It could be doing better in school this time around. So you know better than I do what it is, but these are going to work regardless because these are just pretty universally true kinds of things. So number one is identify your goals. So you might be offended by the sheer obviousness of that, but actually, in my time as a teacher and a coach and things like that, what I have noticed is it's surprisingly difficult for people to pin down in any kind of affirmative language what they actually want. It's very easy to say what you don't want. Like if I ask you, what's bothering you? What could you use less of in your life? Well, people who don't use their turn signal, and, such and such person talking to me like this, and, the fact that I'm always doing this, that I'm procrastinating, all that is saying what you don't want to be doing. And most people, it's a little too easy for them to talk at length about what they don't like, what they don't want, what they're frustrated about. And that just does not turn into a game plan for getting what you want because you can't even verbalize it, right? So step one is figure out in the affirmative what you want for yourself. Not eating junk food is not something you want for yourself, right? Um, Trees don't eat junk food, so you could become a tree. I don't know how, but I'm just saying it's specificity is important. Specificity in the affirmative, right? So instead of don't eat junk food, it should be, well, what are you going to eat instead? Are you going to eat healthy? Are you going to eat things like kale and broccoli and seaweed and things like exogenous ketones? I just got that from Tim Ferriss. I don't really know what they are, but it sounds exotic and it sounds like whatever supplements are involved are expensive. So identify your goals. Actually decide. I would just pick, well, what I did actually is I made a list of 12 things that I am going to, well, I'm already getting ahead of myself. This goes into point number 5, I think. But I'll just say as an overview, and with a caveat that I'm going to come back to this for more development, is that I made a list of 12 things, one new habit a month that I want to do. The first one is as simple as flossing twice a day. Okay, so and then it gets into more involved things as the year goes by, as I get some momentum. So, and then I also have 12 things that I'm going to discontinue doing. So once a month, I'm going to add something and subtract something, and 12 months will go by. And if I'm successful with this, which I intend to be, then I can look back on concrete things that I now do regularly, and equally concrete things that I don't do anymore. That's the goal. Specificity is everything. So that's number 1, identify your goals. Number 2 would be to schedule all goal-related activities. So what that forces you to do is it forces you to identify what has to be done for these goals to become a reality. If my goal is to have more courage, let's say, I got that from, I was listening to this interview with Oprah. She was on the Stephen Colbert show, and she said that she doesn't do these resolutions anymore because it's sort of a different point, but she said she always gets hit with challenge, like she always gets super duper challenged in the area she asks for more of. Like if she asks for love, she gets a lot of people who are very hard to love, right? So I get that. But this idea of if you ask for, if my goal is to have more courage by the end of the year, then I don't just go along with business as usual, waiting to feel more courage. No, I'm going to, for example, study people who exemplify this. Like, let's say I'm going to start reading books about, I don't know, people who overcame tremendous adversity, people who were faced with situations that only resolved themselves the way they did because of the courage of that person. So it could be something about a military general, it could be someone in sports, it could be somebody who, like I did some caretaker work actually a little while back for a guy who had spinal muscular atrophy. He could only move his eyes and his jaw. This was an incredibly courageous person. Maybe I would schedule time to reflect on, like actually schedule it, right? Block out time where what I'm responsible for doing right now is reflecting on the character of this person and just recalling his mannerisms and how he went about his life, and the fact that he managed to have a normal job and a normal family in spite of only being able to move his eyes and his jaw, right? That is a lot of courage. So just an example, that's how you identify. So it forces you to identify what can you do. If your goal is to save money, well, then you have to schedule looking over your spending and expenses. You have to write in when it is you're going to come up with a budget. Not just that you're going to do it, but when. There's going to be a specific day at a specific time where you go to a specific place and you get this worked out. So you need to have some kind of day planner or a calendar on your phone or some way that you can schedule these things in. So that's number 2, schedule, right? So number 1 is to identify the goals to begin with. And number 2 is that everything involved in the execution of it, or moving the dial, moving the ball forward, is a plan. You don't have to have you don't have to plan everything that far out, but every time you identify an action that can be taken by you towards the fulfillment of the goal, that gets written in, that gets scheduled, that becomes a commitment that you have, like a meeting or something. If you have a hard time holding commitments to yourself, say I have a meeting with myself at 7 a.m. to go over the day. More examples. So number 3 is obviously related to the first 2, which is to think on paper. So this is, and another word for what I'm talking about would be facilitated introspection. So, for example, don't just write down the goals and schedule the activities, but do some of the thinking work about this on paper. It's a form of journaling. You could really write down, and I do mean a pen on a piece of paper. I don't just mean typing. The reason why writing things down is important is because it actually engages your brain in a way that typing does not. There's just research on this. They monitor brain activity. I don't know. I don't have the kind of background to tell you exactly why and exactly what it is about writing versus typing, but data is data, and your brain responds. Your brain is much more engaged and across different parts of your brain when you do write. So what would you write about? Well, going back to what I said earlier, writing down the goals and actually rewriting them on a daily basis. There's a practice of writing your 10 major goals on paper from memory every day. Now, how long would that actually take? Just a few minutes, right? If you're not just coming up with them on the spot. Once you've come up with them, then that's the hard part. But just writing them and rewriting them on a daily basis to force your brain and your motor functions simultaneously to engage with an idea. Because when you write it down in a way, you are doing something about it. You're not just thinking about it. There's a big difference between thinking about something and writing about something. See, I don't just think about these topics, right? Typically, I write about them first, and then I do the talk, and then I do the video where I'm just speaking extemporaneously about it. Because when I see my ideas on paper, it's always a revelation to me. Sometimes just thinking can be an epiphany, but it goes from here to here once it's written down, because I'm looking at my thoughts. I'm literally looking at them. They're crystallized in whatever verbiage I've used, and I can see, wow, that's really what I think about this, or am I sure that's really what I think? And you can tinker with it, but I'm just engaging. That's really the reason, is that you would engage with it, and that this would become a part of your reality. And there's something about a physical piece of paper that contains as a document your goals or your ideas or even your hesitations about something. Write it all down. Write it all down and describe the kind of feelings, emotional experiences, or the kind of life, the kind of circumstances that you want these changes or these goals to promote in your life. Because when you do that and you write it down, there is now something, there's an objective, concrete thing that exists in the world that reflects the fact that you've started this process of goals. It's almost as important, and I would say it is just as important. It just happens earlier in the process. Just as important as seeing the number on the scale go down, or the number on the bank account going up, or printing out that resume, or buying that gym membership. It's a thing. It's a thing that exists. It's objective. It's not just floating around in this cloudy, murky, nebulous, second-guessing, bet-hedging world of your mind. And that counts for a lot. Number 4, so what do we got so far? Number 1, identify your goals. Number 2, schedule all goal-related activities. Number 3, think on paper, generally speaking, and default when you're thinking through something to writing through something. Number 4 would be create positive associations. So this goes into more of the qualitative areas. This is less. So the first 3 things were really concrete, the things that you do, and that can be, you can have metrics on this, right? You can see how consistently you do it, but this is the more qualitative area. So when I say create positive associations, this really goes back to understanding the mechanism of habit formation versus the mechanism of assimilating information. So you can understand something very well on an academic or theoretical level, and that's wonderful because you can have involved conversations about it, and you just become more knowledgeable. But you can do all of that without it ever translating into habituated behaviors. And until your habitual behaviors change, the things that you do on autopilot, until your autopilot has changed course, your life doesn't change. All right? It hasn't made a big difference in my life that I'm able to have more interesting conversations with a Lyft driver, or at a cocktail party, or if I'm talking to a girl at a bar or whatever, right? That does not change anything in my life. So learning this new information is great, but what has changed my life are changes in the way that I go about my day, on a regular basis and on a prolonged basis. So learning about something and adopting and consistently implementing behavior are just different. And if we want to have our behavior and our habits catch up with our intellectual understanding, then we have to learn how to interface with our habit forming mechanism. And how do our habits form? Well, they start forming very early on in life. We form habits long before we even have the power of reasoning or analysis. We start mimicking the behavior around us. And we internalize behaviors based on emotions, not based on language. Again, because the habits start forming before our language abilities have formed, even as very small children. This is just the case. So just because we become reasonable and analytical and rational to whatever degree we do, doesn't mean that now the way we change our behaviors switches over into the realm of reason and analytics. It just stays where it is. Your brain is your brain. So what you want to do is, because changes are scary, changes are daunting, changes are full of self-doubt and hesitation and problems with staying motivated. So your best bet is to bring in areas of positive association into the new areas that are not so familiar or comfortable yet, or they could be even radically unfamiliar. So for example, if you want to get into shape and you want to start going to the gym, well, what I would suggest you do, and let's say this is not something you're comfortable with, let's say you don't have an athletic background. See, if you have an athletic background and you've always been into sports, but you've just maybe you had some kids and they take up a heck of a lot of your time, and maybe you put on some weight and you want to get it back. You want to get back to your pre-pregnancy weight or something, or whatever it might be. Well, you have a lot of muscle memory working with you there. But if it's not, if this is really uncomfortable and really different and a lot of, like let's say sort of self-esteem or self-image type issues are getting in the way, that's just a lot of fear, right? So you can mitigate that tremendously by bringing in things that you feel good about and are warm and familiar and comfortable, like have your favorite music with you, for sure. Like the music that's the most happy, upbeat, amped up kind of music that you can possibly think of that you like. Don't ever go without that, right? Get a friend to come with you who's the kind of person when you're around them, you're amped up, you're positive, you're motivated. They're like your instigator, right? Keep people like that around you if they're compatible with where you're trying to go. And if you don't have so much of that, then join some kind of group or a meetup or something like that, where you can have some kind of social accountability, and you can use, I would say, the good vibes of people kind of getting together and having some community or companionship as a way to make this more fun and more palatable for you. So that's just one example, but you can see what I'm getting at and what the method is, right? Is that you want to, because what you're doing is you're creating synaptic connections in your brain where you're now associating and you're linking subconsciously things that you're very happy to do, that you're willing to do, that you feel very competent at doing, or that you just know are safe, with things that are not, with things that are scary and new and daunting. And that absolutely mitigates the hesitation or the fear or the self-doubt or whatever it might be, right? You're bringing in some familiarity and comfort to mitigate the unfamiliarity, I'm choking over my words, unfamiliarity and discomfort. So that's number 4, is to create positive associations. Number 5 is go slow. Go slow because, again, change is scary. Why is it scary? Because it challenges the basic tenets of your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind is doing what it's doing and automating you in whatever really habitual patterns of thinking and behaving that you have to protect you. It's running on autopilot so that you don't have to negotiate every moment of the day with how you're going to do this, how you're going to handle this, how are you going to get out of bed and tie your shoes or take a shower or brush your teeth. Like, these are automated things to save you energy, right? But if you're going to change something about how you think or how you behave or how you speak to people or your posture or whatever, your brain thinks that the way you're doing things now is the way that it should be doing them based on your beliefs about who you are and how the world works and what kind of a world it is and where you fit into it and where you fall on the spectrum of how people express themselves and all kinds of things like that. So when you go against it, there's an alarm bell in there that goes off and says, like, what are you doing? You're turning everything upside down, and this is going against what we know to be correct about how to survive in the world. Well, your subconscious doesn't really know. Your subconscious is not the last word on this. What you want for yourself is the last word on this, but you can work with. There is a flexibility and an elasticity in your subconscious mind. You just have to tread lightly so that you don't trigger the guard dogs. Does that make sense? Because too much change will stress you out. It'll full on trigger your fight or flight response, and you will develop a tremendous aversion to these new things that you actually set as your goals. Well, the last thing you want is a real kind of biologically driven aversion to something that you've decided that you want for yourself, right? Like imagine if you developed a phobia or a sense of trauma about going to the gym because you threw in go to the gym along with everything else you wanted all at once. It's easy to burn out that way, and it's easy to backslide and just fall off the wagon completely when you approach it like that. So like I said before, I identified one thing a month that I'm going to do. One new thing a month to add and one new thing a month to take away. And these start easy and they get harder or more involved as the year goes by. Right? One of them is I want to start reading more books. It's said that, high performing type people or experts that they read about a book a week. So at around July or August, I'm going to start trying to read a book a week. Got it? So I don't start the year with that. I build up some, I start slow. January, this month, my goal is to floss twice a day. That's the only new thing I'm trying to work in. But if I can do that, and there's no reason I can't do it, right? So, but if I do that, then I've got you start to get some wins under your belt, you start to get some momentum, and you start to feel pretty confident about your willpower, right? And then you gradually move on to things that are bigger tests or bigger challenges. So go one at a time, go slow, and start with things that require very minimal effort. If you pick one thing and it's a huge thing, it's the same thing as piling on way too much. It's just you're not setting yourself up for success here. And I'm not the first person to point that out. So that's number 5, go slow. So where are we at? Identify your goals, schedule goal-related activities, think on paper, create positive associations, go slowly. And the last one is daydream. You want to daydream because think of it like this. You've got a line right here, like a straight line, and then you've got a sine wave sort of weaving through that line. Well, that line is any kind of object at all, something that you want, a relationship, a job, being in good shape, a certain habit, spending habits, how you want things to work out between you and somebody else. And the crest of that wave is the contemplation of its presence or the contemplation of its possibility if it's not present. And the trough of the wave and the bottom is the contemplation of its absence if it's not part of your life, or or contemplating the possibility of its negation if it is in your life, right? So this is very important because sometimes when people get some good things going on for them, they self-sabotage. They don't know what to do with themselves because they're not mentally prepared for crossing this bridge between wanting something and having something. Most people, okay, are really good at wanting things and pretty bad at having things. Because what they're doing in their thoughts is they're rehearsing the chase. They're rehearsing the act of pursuing it. They're not rehearsing how they'd feel once they've gotten it. So daydream about whatever it is you want without reminding yourself that it's not here. And if you've got something good, practice contemplating the goodness that's going on in your life without your mind ever entertaining the notion of it going away or disappearing. Just get into how good it feels. And that prepares you It prepares you to respond intelligently to things that are already good that are happening or things that will start showing up when you implement the rest of this. So identify your goals, schedule the activities that are related to your goals, think on paper, don't think in your head, think on the page, make associations that are positive, go slowly, and just let yourself daydream and indulge in a happy contemplation of these things that you want, just for the sake of conditioning your mind to the possibility that these things could, the real possibility of these things for you. So, guys, that's my advice. Send in some thoughts, send in your goals, send in how you do with them over the course of the year. I will be documenting my process over the next 12 months, and we'll be sharing little bits and pieces here and there. So please join in with me. So again, my name is Jasvinder, guys. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll talk soon. All right.